Peace, everybody. Welcome to the More Science PodClass. Islam. First, I'd like to rise, give perfect praise to Allah, the Father of the universe, the Father of all things. Islam. Give honor to His Prophet, Noble Drew Ali. Give honor to His forerunner, Marcus Most High Garvey. Give honor to all of you in attendance. Give honor to all the Moors, past, present, and future. Give honor to our guest speakers tonight, Darrell Dacres. Islam. Give honor to the host. Give honor to Roku TV, Elevate the Family TV Network, Islam Elevate TV Network. Islam give honor to YouTube for even having us able to stream on this platform. Islam. So real quick, tonight we're gonna set the tone with talking about CVI, community violence intervention, and tonight is not a regular podcast. This is a PodClass. It's where we come to learn something, and we're gonna be clear about what we're learning, clear about explaining what we're learning, and so that's typically the tone for tonight. We're trying to learn something about something very important in our communities. And we have a brother here tonight that's definitely going to be able to explain away what it is that we actually do in our neighborhoods in regards to CVI, in regards to outreach work, in regards to violence prevention, and a lot of those things include things like what outreach really looks like. We want to talk about why visible leadership really matters, and how the work reduces violence, and why it cannot be an afterthought when it comes to funding, and when it comes to the youth and its takeaways from the importance of the work that we do. So with that being said, I want to introduce our guests. Tonight we have Darrell Dacres. Islam. Darrell is a CVI advocate, a district council for the 20th district, the violence prevention program manager for One Northside CP4P. He's also the founder of Savior Inc. Islam. His work reflects his consistency, trust building leadership, community responsibility, things of that nature. Through outreach and prevention and direct engagement, he's been a part of the real work and helping reduce harm and support the safer neighborhoods. So tonight, we're going to hear from his experience, learn from his insight, and better understand what this work actually looks like, not just in theory, really, but in real life, from the trenches, you know. So we welcome Brother Darrell here. So let's begin really at the foundation, man. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, man, in your own words. Kind of briefly. I already gave you an introduction, so you don't really got to do much, but just give us a little bit about yourself in your own words and what pulled you into this kind of work.
Yeah, first off, thank you all for having me on the platform. I appreciate you, brother. It's always good to see a brother bringing some good knowledge to the community, especially with the more science background, with some history and some logistics. Uh, Much appreciation for that. So I'll start off by just saying how I got into the work. I honestly was a participant myself. I in my day-to-day work, I have a staff that has caseloads of participants. Each of my staff has about 10 to 15 participants each. Uh, their participants consist of active, whether they group members, gang members, most likely to commit acts of violence, victims of violence. And basically, our job is to provide them resources and try to provide outlets to transition them from whatever situation they're going through. We rely on pillars. We have a whole network of workers across the city. We helping with cases, expunge backgrounds, helping to get people really get their foot in the door in the work environment. We have case managers, it's a nice put them in a nice stable system where they feel like they are part of society. A lot of our participants, a lot of their downfall comes from their neighborhoods, their family members are really just kind of kicking them out of the community and them trying to find a place for themselves, whether that be a gang or drugs or whatever it is. So what we do is we acknowledge that they have trauma. We trauma informed ourselves, and we just try to find a way where we could bridge the gap to bring them back to the community and feel as if like, if you feel like you're a part of the community, then you're not so quick to want to destroy it. Like I said myself, when I got introduced with CVI work, I was a participant myself. I was active in the streets, and the group that introduced me in at the time, they was called Ceasefire. I don't believe they still active in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, or at least we don't partner with them. They had a intervention. A good friend of mine was killed in front of a storefront that I was managing at the time over on Oakley and Devon. And when he passed away, or he didn't even pass away, he was kind of going through changes, and they took so long to kind of move him from where they shot him that there was so many people from the neighborhood that seen him and slain on the floor, take his last breaths before they took him to the hospital or decided that they was going to move him or whatever. And there was a lot of emotion in the community. People wanted to retaliate, they wanted revenge, and me myself included. I wanted the same thing. And when the intervention team came to the community and started kind of weighing options and telling me that I should lead the community, initially I thought that they didn't respect me. They didn't respect what my block had going on, or the growth that I felt like we was contributing to the community. And I felt a little disrespect to myself, but they ultimately, because I did have respect for those gentlemen that was working that program, I eventually left the block. And later on, not too long after I left, the guys that shot my brother, my friend, I called him my brother. Uh, they came back and shot the block up again. And it was just I had a moment where I kind of realized that you know Harlem, that was his name. He wasn't here no more, and it was like, damn, I still have a chance at life. I'm still here, and I was kind of grateful that I had somebody in my corner to kind of push me in a different direction. So I started studying a little bit more, getting more intertwined with the CVI networks and a lot of the different things that was happening. And I had several tragedies happen in my life. My daughter passed away. Uh, she had brain damage. Uh, she had a victim of a drowning,
Mhm.
uh, and
Pardon.
my cousin was killed. He was killed on Father's Day, nonetheless. One of those Chicago shootings. It was 2016 E-way shooting. Never was. The shooter was never identified. And there was a lot of trauma that I was going through personally, just through the community and losing family members, etc. And the people who at that time, the program had transitioned from ceasefire to cure violence, which is now a CP4P, Communities Partner for Peace. But then they had reached out to me and asked if I wanted to elevate from a volunteer, because I wasn't exactly a participant anymore, because I was kind of transitioning my life. If I wanted to go from a volunteer to a violence interrupter, and I didn't 100% understand what that was, because I still had kind of like a street mentality, although I wasn't myself involved in so deep as I was when I first got introduced to the program. Uh, I needed the money, and I needed, I was interested. So that's how I initially got hired and started working the program, and then mentoring the kids and building and adding things to the program that we didn't have in the community when I was growing up. And
Mhm.
ultimately became the supervisor. Now I'm the program manager.
Sweet, man. Man, you know, when people hear your titles, you know what I mean. CVI advocate, district counselor, program manager, you know, organizer. Uh, you've created your own organization. Founder, right? So what do you really want people to understand about those particular titles? You know what I'm saying? About what you actually do, because it matters. Because some titles can sound polished, and some it's always a story behind the title. But the real story is always in the work behind the titles and what you really actually do. So if you could, man, just when people hear your titles, what do you want them to think about you, man?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking me that, brother. Well, when I was in the streets, there was a saying. It was a lot of sayings, honestly. You had to pick up quick. But the title don't make the man make the title. So it's really a matter of, even if somebody got my position or the title that I have, I don't necessarily think that it's always the same, right? Like there's different ways to do the work, and depending on your target audience, what works for me might not work for the next person. What works for the next person might not work for me. But the reason I have so many different titles is because I specifically am effective in different areas of the work where we need representation. And a lot of times I go into these rooms and I don't see people that look like us, me and you, black and brown people, um, in high representation in the community where that's the only representation. So like more specifically, you go on the south and west side, it's predominantly, black people and Latinos. But if you look at, who's in leadership, that's not necessarily who's the landlords in their communities. That's not necessarily who's in governance in their communities. So I kind of caught on to a lot of that kind of fast. When I first got hired, the program I was working with was One Northside. I'm still with them today. One Northside has uh, a platform where they do multiple things that they organize on. There's multiple issue teams. And when I first got in, I of course was working in violence prevention, but I latched on to their police accountability team, which like I said, they have housing, restorative justice, economic justice, tax the rich. One Northside does a plethora of different ordinances they fight for. Um, they have what they call a C4, which is different from a 501c3. Learned all this getting into the work, the 501c3 being a non for profit, being able to create jobs for people like you and me, that do outreach that can, give back to the community. And then there's the C4, which allows us to get in political campaigns and allow us to have some backing and some representation in terms of trying to raise money or trying to uh, get the proper people in the seat for the community that actually represent, like from a grassroots perspective, and not just anybody with a commercial or the person that has the most money. So seeing all of
Yeah,
that,
right.
I'm sorry, you get me?
No, yeah, I hear you. Go ahead, go ahead.
No,
I'm listening. Go ahead. My
no,
bad part.
no, you good, you good. I just was making sure my audio was all right. But
No,
yeah,
you
so
good.
seeing all of that, it made me want to talk with the brothers, like who has it for the black people, who's doing it for, because I'm also Jamaican and Belizean, so
Hmm.
there's a lot of issues regarding like immigration and stereotypes where people maybe look at things one way or another. Growing up, I had to fight a lot of different issues that, like I say, it's not everybody's issue. So I'm familiar with when you want to solve a problem, you have to get down to the nitty gritty of the specifics, right? Like what do you want to change? What do you want to fight for? And I've just been going along for the ride, learning as I go, and trying to be that representation in the room every time I see that there is none. So when I was
So
on the police
yeah,
account,
so that's basically what you're saying. I don't mean to cut you off, but I just don't want to lose my words. You want to make sure everybody understands that the the titles that you hold is the representation that we actually need in areas that we lack, right?
yeah,
And that
absolutely.
when we are in those particular places, you know, there's certain things and there's certain issues that come across these tables that only a person like yourself can actually have a solution or build a solution to, because you come from what you're trying to protect and what you're trying to create some type of reality for in those rooms.
Well, sometimes I'm conflicted. I'll be honest. A lot
Yeah,
of a
I mean,
lot
I
of
bet.
a lot of what I say
Yeah,
sometimes is I'm the representation of my community. I'm not always my own voice. Sometimes I have very strong opinions that I do have to put to the side sometimes because as an elected official, I represent an entire community and it's not necessarily my opinion that I'm putting out when I'm speaking on public platforms. I'm speaking for a multitude of people who chose me specifically to represent them. So I do have to be careful what I say and how I say it. But
yeah,
the
no question.
reason they picked me is because I'm very genuine, and if I say it, I mean it, and I'm really not going to too much sugarcoat it. You know, just like I said, being mindful of representation, that I try not to overdo my part, but I'm definitely. I'm explicit with voicing my opinion and making sure that the voice of the community that's not represented the most is being heard in the rooms that I do find myself being in. Now,
And we appreciate that too, brother. We definitely appreciate that too, man. But look, we got to get into the next like segment, right? Because we can go on and on and on, but we definitely got to stay on track, right?
yeah,
So
no
the
doubt.
let's just kind of like segue into like what is CVI? What actually is community violence intervention? If you could just clearly explain those basics to the people, you know what I mean, in simple terms, like how is CVI different from policing or traditional punitive approaches? What do people usually misunderstand about violence prevention work? Why this work often is hard to notice, even when it's working? Why is prevention sometimes harder for the public to value than reaction? When people hear violence prevention, what should they understand that they usually miss? You know what I mean? You can tackle that however you want, but that's just the actual, that's the direction of this particular segment. So first of all, what is community violence intervention?
So, community violence intervention is an alternate methodology in terms of a response to violence in the community, right? So, there historically, the main solution to violence in the community was police, right? Like, let's
Hmm.
call 911. Um, which that hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Much respect to the police to do their job, risk their life for the people. But historically, we and we from Chicago, right? So I got to speak on our city. I can't speak on the rest of the world. But in Chicago, we're known to have a lot of shootings, a lot of violence, this and that. But we also what is not so much talked about when people talk about the violence in Chicago is that the CPD, Chicago Police Department, gets about 54, 55% of our budget, from the whole city of Chicago. Like they get more than anybody else in terms of public service and everybody else added together in terms of public service. So when you think about how much money they're getting, it doesn't equate to bringing down the violence because as they get more money, the violence goes up. So the policing that people try to funnel money to policing to stop violence didn't work. All the data showed that it didn't work. But we even still today they still get the money, and it's not necessary, And I don't think that they should be underpaid. Don't get me wrong. I'm not necessarily anti-police. If there's a murderer going around killing people or raping people or doing anything solicit, we want these people to go to jail. But when we're talking about just community violence and alternate solutions, we're talking about historically, right? Like when the Black Codes was around, it's basic things that happens in the Black community that was labeled criminal, right? And we talk a lot about drinking out the water fountain, but that doesn't get into like redlining or the three strikes you out or mandatory minimums. There's other things that affected the community that was impunitive for basically just existing, right? Just being Black, a person of color. So when things start changing, we get a black president, this and that, we start actually putting some of these studies to use and not just leaving them on the desk and say, okay, well, what can we do other than police? What can we do other than just lock everybody up? And I believe the initial starting, like I said, ceasefire, that kind of stuff, it was reentry programs, right? Like guys coming back from the penitentiary had influence on the streets, and they was able to use that influence to detour the violence a little bit. Which I think was the roots, like that's how it started and where it came from. Me personally, I never been to the penitentiary, and I've been very effective in CVI work just off my lived experience, So like I say, there's different strokes for different folks, and I do believe that every methodology has its place in the work in terms of CVI. But me, CVI just looks like a person that has influence in the community with those who are most likely to commit acts of violence or victims of violence, and can detour them in a positive way that can lead to less casualties.
Right. So okay. All right. So with that being said, like the work that we do, man, is it's sometimes it's a hard job to actually swallow. With seeing the mothers and seeing the families and seeing the hurt and the pain in the communities that we service after these particular unfortunate events, right? What do people usually misunderstand about like what we do in violence prevention? And why is the work so often like hard to notice what we're doing even when it's working? Because we just really talked about like what community violence intervention is and how different it is from the traditional punitive approaches from police and the things of that matter, right? So we know that it's working. We see the numbers that it's working. We know the things that's happening because we on the front lines, right? We in the trenches with the things that's actually going on. So when the work is hard to notice, even when it's noticing, tell us why it works, man, and what do people misunderstand about work, what you do.
That's that's a fair question. And I'll start with, I said a few things already that I don't want to repeat myself, but it gets to the specifics of the work. When you kick a person out of the village, when you kick a person out of the community or a whole people because of how they look or how they talk or whatever the situation is, especially if they don't have nowhere else to go. If all they know is this neighborhood, this block, this group, this crew, then they don't care about tearing down the community, And I think people understand that part. You hear super predators and all these crazy words for somebody who's going through major trauma, but you don't really hear about why they're going through the trauma. What we do, we're very trauma informed. So when somebody's going ballistic and they're screaming or crazy or got a gun or they do something that somebody else might think you need a police officer for, we might be able to talk that person off the edge, walk them off the block, get them to relocate. And often, because we are very close in proximity with our participants, we often get mistaken for the same people that's trying to tear down the community. Oh, they don't work. Oh, they don't care about the community. Oh, they're just a front. You hear these kind of terminology and words, but these people don't ultimately know the work that we do. We come from a lived experience. We come from being trauma informed. We're hyper local. We know the entire community. We know the stores. We know that person's trauma as much as they do because we probably go through some of it. We were lucky enough to get the proper mental health services to get to put our life on the right track. So often people kind of look at us as the detriment in the community without seeing all the good that's being done. And more and worse than that, when we do a good job in the CVI world, oftentimes that looks like getting fired, which might put a person back in trauma without having job security or, a way to pay their bills because they put violence prevention as this narrative. We're going to put CVI money where the most violence is happening. But then when you do a good job and you start bringing down violence in your community, now you're not really qualified for that violence prevention money. So it's almost like they're only going to put the money in the communities after they let it get torn apart instead of systematically leaving preventative measures as a part of the budget citywide. It's like we go and fight for our checks, and we have to go fight for budgets in Springfield and DC and this and that. So it's like we often get mistaken for the same participants that we're trying to help because of our trauma and our lived experience. But first of all, there's a big difference. We are employees, we are professionals, we're trained to go out there and do the work that we do, whether it's providing resources, safe spaces, or brokering peace agreements, whatever that may look like. Different from the participants who are actually just still living in that trauma that and we deal with our own trauma still daily, but we're working through ways to get through it to help other people. But they're still dealing with trauma without that help. We're the only help they got.
I mean, who you telling, right? But you're speaking on something I think is very important, and I don't even really want to like get off of that particular topic. I want to kind of stay on that, so we'll get back to some things that I want to kind of speak on. Have a conversation about it a little bit. But let's stick with this funding part because you hit on some things that I think a lot of people kind of miss with the work that we do, right? I don't think people understand where the money comes from, that pays us because I think at the end of the day, you know, when you spoke on how when you do a good job, the funding leaves, right? So kind of like let's talk about that because a lot we got to really get to this level of understanding about this particular work from the outside looking in because at the end of the day, um, a lot of times we do our work relentlessly, right? We do our work 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, right, when everybody else is sleeping, right? And we getting up and we trying to take care of some families that really need some assistance and things of that nature, and then the list goes on about what we do, right? But I mean, you know it gets to a place where you really wonder, like, man, like, how is this work lacking funding? Like, how is this not a continuous thing that we have to talk about? So let's get into funding really fast, right? And so what does our funding actually come from for the violence prevention work that we do? And why is it necessary for us as staff, right? Outreach for trainings and events that we have, and staying consistent. Let's just start there. So, let's just start there. So, where does the funding really come from, and why is it necessary for us to actually go out and do things to get the money?
Well, a lot of our funders is from private donations. I think a lot of people think that we get government money or whatever, but historically, the state and the city has not directly put money into CVI ever.
Right.
I believe in the last 2 years or 3 years is the only like is the consist is like the only time they had consistent money, and I think the first years where they even considered putting CVI work money into that work. So there's a big misunderstanding in terms of just people think that we automatically have funds that we don't. A lot of times, like I said, most of our funds come from private funders. uh, we file for different grants, multiple grants at a time annually, so we can keep our staff employed, and we expand our coverage areas. Specifically, like let's say me and you, right? Our teams work in Uptown and Rogers Park area because those are some of the most violent areas on the north side where our org is. But we cover all neighboring areas in proximity just because, right? Like there's no other violence prevention team that's going to do those hospital responses for those families. There's no other violence prevention team that's able to uh, use their lived experience, what we call LTO, their license to operate with that community or that group in a safe way that's not going to get anybody hurt or, compromise the integrity of anybody's respect factors or their lines of whatever negotiated terms they have in the streets, right? So that's not something that you can really teach. That comes from having the respect of somebody who's already lived that life and they have like a certain amount of respect for you that they'll allow you to give input to what they do. So that's
Hmm.
not always valued. Like I said, sometimes we're looked at as, you know, gang members or like we're a part of the problem, because when people see at-risk youth, they already cancel them out of the community. So when they see you with them, they kind of cancel you out too. But a lot of our money, believe it or not, comes from private donors who see us in the community. Oftentimes, we don't even know the big funders, but they come to our events. They see us passing out food. They see us giving back to the community, whether it's toiletries, feminine products, clothes. I've seen, we've got whole head to toe outfits with guys, new shoes, clothes, sent them to job interviews, help them with their applications, their resumes, help them clean their background up so they can apply for that job, just from point A to point B, direct guidance as to try to help them put their life on track. And that's not everybody's situation, but whatever that in particular participant situation is, most of the job is figuring out what their needs are so we can provide specific needs for whatever their situation is.
So that leads me to ask you this, because we spoke about this before plenty of times. So what happens, right, when the organizations that's doing this work, what happens when they're underfunded? Because I remember at one point you talked about, doing things out your pocket, right? So like
Well, well, before we got the funding, that's what we had to do. A lot of some of the funding we got was because some of those private donors I told you about, they seen us like doing some of the barbecues and our pop-up events. We were part of an org that citywide, they had something called Light in the Nights, where they had funding to do events and things of that nature. And we were in the network and we weren't getting any of that funding. Um, for
hmm
regardless of whatever the reasons were, I advocated for us to get in that same loop, and it took a while. But in the meantime, I also felt that our community needed the same respect that other communities was getting. So if we went in our pockets for a few barbecues, hosted some big events, and a lot of those events, we once we got that funding, we made that a part of the network, such as our Juneteenth event that we do annually, our back to school event where we're giving back school supplies. A lot of those events now we have funding for. Our turkey giveaway, we did that out of our pocket. Like all of that work originally started because we realized the community was missing these things. And if we were going to say we were giving back and we had resources, that we wanted to be the people that was giving it out in the community. And we still do to this day. Like I said, like you got to make your presence felt. Our donors are uh, the people who donated for us. They definitely felt the initiative that we pushed, our resource initiative, where we giving back, like I say, toiletries, feminine products, the community. They come out in tears, thankful that people are able to just give it to them, no strings attached, or, sign your name. It's a beautiful thing actually, but yeah, we didn't even have funding to do that at first, but now we do. Thankful, for our funders to getting us across that board.
So
We
so
fight for that.
so what is now in comparison to, when you were coming out of your own pocket to do small barbecues here and there, right? In comparison, how does it look now with funding, right? And what would it continue to look like if, we continue to get funding?
Well, like I said, we only have a staff of 10. It's only 10 of us. It's only
True.
four outreach workers on the staff of 10. There's two management positions, two case managers, and two victims advocates. And anybody shot past North Avenue all the way back to Evanston, north side of Chicago, we're going to be the team at the hospital. We're going to be the team making contact with the group, seeing if there's anything we can broker between, if there's an issue between that group and another group. Like there's not another proactive group doing the work that we're doing. So, if we had more funding, of course, we could have maybe shifts because we're on call 24 hours. You know,
Right.
like we're not, we don't really have the luxury to say we're not gonna go because it's not, my work hours. Like if somebody's hurt, the family needs the help. They're in crisis, and we understand that, and we signed up to be there. But funding, prolonged funding would look like, maybe shifts. Maybe I don't, maybe in the when we can take a night or two or trade shifts and have a team where we're just not on edge every second of the day. Like I said, we did sign up for this work, but
Yeah.
it can be straining sometimes. And when we're so tapped in and close to the community, a lot of times some of the victims, some of the participants are family members. A lot of times they're people that was in the same groups that we had the closest relationships with. So a lot of these tragedies hit closer to home than just it's sad. It's sad because I feel it like it's my brother, or it is my family member, or it is, it affects people that I feel like are my family. And that's often it can be draining with the work, but that's the nature of having
Share the
LTO.
job. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But just to kind of like add on to what you were saying, it's interesting that with your insight, but I wasn't actually talking about that in particular as far as having shifts and things of that nature, which would be dope, which would be very interesting to have, right? I promise you, I would love if we worked shifts. That would be beautiful because we are on call 24/7, and sometimes it gets crazy. But I was really more so trying to get into like,
Programming,
yeah, programming and the things that we've been able to create and the things that we've been able to do now that we have the proper funding to actually, have some
yeah.
type of,
I can expand on that definitely. And thanks for just even to clarify that. When we first started, we initially got 50 turkeys, right? We was paying out of pocket. So I can't really remember the amount of money we spent, but we got about 50 turkeys. And we were so happy. We was the happiest team ever to pass out them turkeys. I think we passed out like 10 in different spots. We picked like 5 different spots and passed out like 10 turkeys. So we was happy. We was super happy. Now we pass out turkeys. We give out 600 turkeys. We still go to. I think about now we go to like 7 or 8 spots, and we just divvy it up with however many turkeys we get evenly across our drop off locations. But there's
Mhm.
always a need for more. There's always an ask for more, and we do what we can. But every time we pass the last one out, we realize that there's more families that we could have helped. There's more that we could have did, but within the budget and whatever we got, we do better every year. But yeah, we knowing that there's more families. Our first toy giveaway, I think we had 100 toys. In our last toy giveaway, we had about 850. It grows, and it's the more families you can help. Our target is to hit 100 families each event, and sometimes we hit 200 families. Sometimes three. But it definitely is a help when you have some actual backing and some funding behind it. You're not going in your pocket just because, like I say, everything we did out of pocket, we get like 10 times more with funding. We got our financial empowerment classes, right? Where now we're teaching youth how to use the like proper systems to get acclimated in the finance world, where they can have savings, they can build their credit, they can work on their stocks and bonds if they want to. We had over 12 families get their first home loans, where now they're getting housing where through their records that none of their family had ever actually owned a home. So we're changing generational barriers with every budget. Every little bit we add on helps us a little bit more. That's probably 10 more families, you know what I mean? And each event is still currently growing. Our Juneteenth event, we have anywhere from 100 to 200 people come out, DJs, bouncy houses, music, food, barbecue, a plethora of food. We cater to a different audience. Sometimes we got the halal over here for the Muslim brothers, seafood for the I don't eat beef eaters. We got,
Right.
vegetarian. We
Yeah.
got,
Right.
and it's separated, cooked on different grills to respect everybody's culture. And just, we live in a very diverse area. So you try to cater to everybody. And you're not going to make everybody happy. But I think we do a good job at trying.
Yeah, man, and that's interesting that you even went down that route, right? Because um, a lot of times, people say they want peace, and this, that, and the third. They want safer communities, and but not everybody really understands how it actually reduces violence on the ground with all of the things that you just said. So, that's kind of like, let's make that pretty practical right now, and let's just talk about how outreach helps stop conflicts before they become shootings, retaliations, or long-term beef, and what role does de-escalation and mediation play in that process? And I know those particular events are what we call, de-escalation tactics and mediation tactics and things of the nature. What we do in the neighborhood to talk to certain people to get a certain ear or to do things of the nature where it's not a direct, confrontation, and we're able to take things and handle them in a sort of trauma informed sort of process. So let's get into how outreach helps the conflicts before they come. Shooting, retaliations, long term beef, things of that nature, and what role does de escalation play in the mediation process? You know what I mean?
Well, on this, I do want to, and I'm not gonna. We have a professional working understanding with everybody in the peace circle world. The CVI world is very, we have confidentiality with our participants, so we're always looking for the best outcome as to stop the violence. We're not always thinking in punitive, which uh no shade to the police, but that's their main goal. Their main goal is to lock somebody up. They're looking for angles, trying to catch somebody up, the way they talk, this and that. And it leaves people to be like, they feel unsafe and they don't really want to trust them, especially if they got like whatever stuff they got going on in their background. So with
Hmm.
us being able to break that third wall for our participants, right? We're able to kind of intervene. Like, so if like for instance, I could only imagine. I don't know how the CPD operate, but if they know that like it's the anniversary of like somebody who's dead and they were killed, they're probably training their team to come lock somebody up because they know it's going to be a shooting. What we do is we're gonna go out there and we're gonna try to like detour that shooting from even happening. Hey, y'all want to celebrate this person? We're gonna come with candlelight. We're gonna come with some balloons. We're gonna come and try to change the tempo and try to push that energy somewhere else versus trying to catch them for responding to their trauma. You know what I mean? So it's look. We have different way of looking at the work, and it might not, everybody don't appreciate the nature of it. I can only, like there's different people that do different work that they consider, like community work. I don't know, but the way we have a relationship with our participants is very hands on. It's very specific towards the needs of individuals who are probably more likely the agitators. Like this isn't a maybe guy, this is most likely guy. So tapping into the most at risk and being able to know who they are and know what's their triggers and be able to uh, kind of have that enough of LTO likes to operate, respect from that community to be able to guide that person in a different direction is always gonna have more of an effect than like the threat of like arresting that person, because a
Right.
person
Right.
who's willing to shoot somebody or do an act of violence or do whatever, they're already at a state of trauma that they don't care about going to jail or whatever the outcome is. So the thought of, oh well, you'll go to jail, like, you hear people say that, I'll call 911 or this that, like that's an aftermath situation, whereas we are talking about preventative measures.
But so with let's just stay on topic, right? With that being said, right, without being too personal, right, could you give us like a real life example of how that particular prevention might work?
Yeah, well, I could give you so many examples, man. I could give you so many
Yeah.
examples, but I'll start slow, where it's like uh we had a participant who he was looking at some major time, you know,
Hmm.
and he was able to come and do some volunteer work with us to get his service hours, and we was able to write the judge and get this guy some leniency with the judge. He came, he did some speeches with us and this and that. And while he was with
Hmm.
us, he didn't have no problems. He wasn't locked up. He had finished out his case. This kid was on a good path. He wasn't exactly from our neighborhood, but like I told you, we work with neighboring areas. So he kind of went back and fell back into his neighborhood. Less than 3 weeks later, he was killed. You know, and you can say like it would have happened anyway, or if maybe he'd went to jail, he'd have been safe. It's like, but he could have died in jail. Something could have happened to him on the streets. The reality is when we were able to get him out of that space of negativity, we was already like, you know, giving him more life. We was already giving him more time than he probably already had, because he was very much a target. He was very much involved, and we were able to get him, you know, as much as we can out of the way. Now the thing with this work is you have to want it. And I think he did want it for the most part, but the streets can be tempting. And if that when that's all you know, you sometimes get caught up in it and get dragged back in it, whether it's through your peers or whatever have you. But in particular situation, we were we had a good thing going, and it unfortunately just didn't work out. Now there's times where I was on the block, and I seen one of our participants come through the gangway, and he was prepared to shoot at some of the other participants. And believe it or not, he seen me and looked me. I kind of looked him straight in his eyes, and he didn't shoot the block up just because we were standing there. You know, it was some of the outreach team out there, and we was. And I'll be 100% honest, like, because some people will hear that and think like, well, he was scared, or some we had some type of gang influence over him. I don't think it was that. I think it was the respect for what we were doing, and I had already looked out for him when he was in jail and when his family was going through certain situations, that when he seen us out there, he didn't want to disrespect the work that we did for him and the community. That he didn't even shoot his own and his sworn enemies, that he had blank range. So those are
Yeah,
the kind of interventions that it's hard to kind of write about or get funding for, because you're not going to exploit, you know, confidentiality. You're not going to tell
yeah,
on a participant and say
and
anything
that
criminal that they're doing, but you can definitely see from a ground level how you can intervene and stop a shooting or possibly stop someone from getting killed. That it's very hard to document that.
yeah, and just to like kind of add on to that, man, that's the part people often kind of miss. One quote unquote interrupted situation, can sort of, save or protect no more than just one person. You know what I'm saying? Protecting his family, I mean his little brothers, little sisters, work relationships, school relationships, whatever the brother may, been in a relationship at home with his girl, his daughter or son, even his emotional stability, put himself back into a place where he was able to think, what I mean? Because he saw you and was able to, make a decision that was able to change, a lot of different types of futures at that particular moment, man. So kudos to the work that we do. Kudos to you for even, explaining the work in the way that you explaining the work. I mean, because, I know that this work is major. We know that this work is major. We know that this work is not small. We know this is big work. It's hard work that we do. It's uncanny work. It's unorthodox work, and it's work that a lot of people wouldn't even know how to sign up to do. So kudos to you, man. Big kudos to you, man. We almost out of here, man. But I really want to get into a couple of more things before we close out, man, just so we can have some clarity about what it is that we do, man. So um, really quick. Let me go back to a couple of questions that I had earlier. Remember, I told you I wanted to ask you a few questions that we had, that we kind of skipped over because I wanted to talk about the funding, and why was it important that we have funding and things of that nature, right?
Yeah,
Um,
man, shoot.
yeah. So when you look at what it is that we do in sort of this leadership role, right? We got about 10 minutes, so let's be brief, right? Why visible leadership actually matters, right? And we probably have some young people that may watch it, or some people that may be a little bit younger than we are, right? or maybe even some elders that may have a a bit of trouble understanding what it is, um, why we think what it is, and why we think what we do even matters, especially from a leadership position like in the district council's position, right? So even when they
That's
act like they ain't even paying attention, they studying who shows up to these events. They, you know what I mean, like you said, and they know who carries the responsibility, who talks big, and who does the work like we do, right? So let's talk about the visible leadership that we try to impose on our youth, right? And why is it important for young people to see strong, responsible Asiatic men doing the work that protects and serves the community like you do, bro?
Well, when I got into this work, like I said, I did a lot of organizing at One North Side, and we didn't. It wasn't always a lot of brothers where they told me to go in the rooms where the power was, and figure out what the issues was. We was going there with different issue teams, and we'd see who would be good for that position from the community, and we'd fight to get their name on the ballot, and then we'd vote for them. When I first started working, there was no district council positions in Chicago. We fought to get district council positions because there was none around the time Laquan McDonald and all these other different issues was happening. Consent decree, we fought for that. We fought for representation for on a grassroots level for civilian oversight because we didn't have any. And when I seen that I was part of an org that was winning ordinances, and now we're getting for the first time some kind of oversight. I wanted to be on that panel. I wanted to have the voice in the room to represent my people. So I ran for the position out of just kind of didn't want to say I didn't run. I honestly didn't think I would run, I would win or lose. I didn't have too much of a thought. I couldn't have not ran and been comfortable with myself.
You
So
did good though, bro. You did good though, bro. You had like what 1,200 some odd votes or something like that. A
yeah,
little
it
bit
was
more than that.
6,700, something like the little give or
No, and
take.
then you had like 1,200 more than
Oh
the
yeah,
opponent.
in the
You know what I mean?
competition, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
So I didn't think I would win. I don't want to say I didn't think I would win, but I ran because I felt like my voice needed to be heard in the room. The community chose me. So now when people come in those rooms, they do see a face that may look like theirs. It is a voice in the room that has representation in the community that's been overlooked. So instead of me complaining about the problem I saw in the community, I became a part of the solution. I went and put my name on the ballot and fought to get the votes and fought for the election and won my position. I didn't get handpicked. I fought to be here just like I fight in my district council position to fight for accountability for police so that we can get adequate police officers. I fought for that position. I wasn't picked. And I also fight for my position to be um, trained CVI expertise and have the respect in the community to do the work that I do. We don't whether however anybody feels about that, we don't have guaranteed money. Sometimes funding is definitely not. It's a lot of things, but guaranteed. So when I say we fight for it, that means going to talk to our reps in Springfield, going to talk to our senators, going to Washington D.C., fighting on the state level, fighting for city budgets, having meetings with the mayor and who have you, whatever have you, for district council as well as violence prevention. And that's all because we need representation in those rooms. Even if it's not me, we need somebody who understands the work that I do, understands the people the way that I do. If they're going to make a law, a budget, or anything that's going to affect our livelihood, we need people who understand how we're living and what we're going through to be in the room.
Man, that's dope, man. And my takeaway from that is really, you are the epitome of changing people's stereotypes from being negative to positive about our Asiatic brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? You are what real leadership looks like. You know what I mean? And a lot of times our young folks and our elders too, man. Need to see more of the examples. You know what I mean? Like yourself, man. That bring structure and accountability and opportunity and support. To his community. And a way that is rooted in service instead of image. You know what I mean? And so, the difference between, looking important and actually being useful, you know, real leadership ain't really about performance, B. It's about presence. You know what I'm saying? And it's about consistency, and consistency crowns thee with honor. You know what I mean? And so
Absolutely.
showing up when it actually counts, bro. And we appreciate you doing your thing, man. Especially in the rooms where a lot of times we don't have a voice, and you able to voice, your opinion, and with our sauce on it. So we really appreciate you, big bro. And that kind of example can really shift the direction of our youth and our elders, and the way that they think about us. You know what I'm saying? And the work that we do is as far as being outreach workers and victim advocates and case managers and CBI advocates and things of that nature, right? And so, people never, measure the work that we do. And so I'm glad that you was able to come on here and really, give a measure about the work that we do and give people, an outlook on, or overview of what it is that we do and how important it is and the things that we need to continue to work. I think that it's very important that our audience takes away from this, um, you know, you know, the things that reduces violence and are able to, you know, apply it to them, not to them, but to their communities, and however they feel necessary. You know what I mean? By joining the organization, or telling their children or speaking to their friends about it in a manner where it's more productive. And so, my final takeaway from this, man, is I want to bring the people directly into this, man. So if you're listening tonight, man, if you think about, what if you're thinking about what kind of like stood out to you or whatever the case may be, if you heard anything tonight that changed how you thought about violence prevention, or anything of that matter, if you're thinking about leadership in your community, what does it look like to you, man? And what kind of support do you think your community actually needs right now? And so with that being said, man, I'm gonna let you take us out, man. We got a few more minutes, man. If you got any closing statements that you want people to understand about the work, real briefly, man. We got about 3 minutes before we really shut it down, man. So again, man, I'm happy to have you here, man, and answer these questions. They probably wasn't tough questions, but I just wanted to ask you some questions where you was able to really dive into some things to get some clarity, man. So with that being said, just take us out of here, man. I'll get us out of here.
Yeah, much appreciation, man. And like I said, we're on the north side of Chicago, Rogers Park, uptown area. I'm born and raised Chicago, and I come from a family of migrants, Jamaican. My father was Belizean, my mother's from Kingston, Jamaica. So it's I fight the stereotypes. We are not our circumstances. We are definitely more. And whoever you want to be, you're gonna be the person you want to be. So you definitely said a mouthful already. I ain't gonna just over talk the platform. Much appreciation to having me today, and definitely invite me back as well. Like I
Oh man,
said,
definitely, man.
it's important to have us in these spaces, and for all the work I do for other people. We ain't talked too much about my org. That's one of the main reasons I started Save Inc. Sufficient acceleration for a variety of operations. To tap in with the youth and get into more of the specifics of the needs of our people, and as far as just being indigenous, our Moorish American rights, our birthrights, our traditions, trials and tribulations we going through, to be recognized in the government in which we live. So it's definitely well to work for everybody else and have community. But while that's happening, community starts at home. So that's definitely
So,
something I want to leave that note for the people to rise on that. You know what I'm saying? And shout out to our funders. MFS, Metropolitan Family Services, One North Side, and the whole CVI network.
All right, man. I appreciate you, big bro, man. I appreciate you, man. And thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight, man. The lesson is simple, man. Safe communities do not happen by accident, man. They take people, effort, trust, consistency, and investment. And thank you to our funders, man. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you to the people that's having us. Thank you to Elevate the Family, showing on Roku TV, man. Thank you, YouTube, man. Thank you a lot, man. Peace and love, peace and blessings, man. I appreciate you, man. Tell the family I said what's happening.
Islam.
All right, big bro.
Peace, peace.
Peace.